He was the missing link between the blues shouter and the rock and roll star. One of the singers who dragged the 12-bar blues out of backroom bars and onto jukeboxes and teenage radio. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would later call him the brawny-voiced boss of the blues. And songwriter Doc Pomus went even further. Rock and roll, he said, would never have happened without him. If you trace the line from Kansas City boogie-woogie to rhythm and blues to rock and roll, Big Joe Turner is standing right at the crossroads. He's not a footnote, he's the bridge.
Rattle and roll, yeah, rattle and roll. You won't do right, I don't know. Yeah, rattle and roll.
Joseph Vernon Turner Jr. was born in Kansas City, Missouri, on May 18, 1911, to Joseph Sr. and Georgie Harrington Turner. When Joe was just 4 years old, his father was killed in a train accident, leaving his mother to hold the family together. Like so many African American singers of his generation, Joe's first stage was the church. He sang in the choir, soaking up spirituals and hymns, then took that same voice out onto the street corners of Kansas City, passing the hat to help bring in money. School didn't last. By 14, Joe had left the classroom behind and gone looking for work, first as a cook in the city's booming nightlife scene, and then behind the bar. It wasn't long before customers realized the big kid pouring drinks had a voice that could stop conversations cold. The key thing about Kansas City in those years is that it was a 24-hour town. Clubs, gambling, music on every block, especially under the Pendergrass political machine. Joe grew up right inside that energy. He worked in legendary joints like the Kingfish Club and the Sunset, neighborhood night spots where work, pleasure, and danger ran side by side. There he earned a nickname that would follow him for life, the Singing Barman. He was supposed to be mixing drinks. Instead, he was shouting blues verses over the bandstand. Long, improvised stories about cheating lovers, hard times, and good whiskey, all delivered with a grin. Kansas City cops raided those clubs regularly. Turner remembered that the club bosses kept a bondsman stationed at the police station. Musicians would be booked, sign their names, pay the fine, and be back on the bandstand by dawn. In that law-bending nightlife, Joe Turner found the canvas for his voice. At the Sunset Club, Turner met the man who would become his most important early partner, boogie-woogie pianist Pete Johnson. Night after night, Joe shouted blues verses while Pete's right hand hammered dazzling ripple patterns up and down the keyboard. It wasn't yet called rock and roll, but it rocked. The Sunset was run by Piney Brown, who kept the place jumping with a strict but savvy hand. The club offered separate but equal facilities for white customers. Black patrons and musicians lived with daily reminders of Jim Crow. Turner honored his boss in a song that would become a signature, Piney Brown Blues. In the lyrics, Joe calls Piney a friend and protector, someone who kept the band working, bail money ready, and the drinks flowing. It was a musical thank you from a man who understood how fragile his livelihood could be. In those smoke-filled rooms, Turner and Johnson were refining something that would soon leap from the clubs to one of America's most famous stages. In 1938, producer John Hammond came to Kansas City, looking for the real sound of the blues. When he heard Joe Turner and Pete Johnson at the Sunset, he invited them to New York City to appear in his now legendary From Spirituals to Swing concert at Carnegie Hall. The crowd that night heard spirituals, big bands, and rural blues. Then Joe Turner stepped to the front, Pete Johnson at the piano, and they tore into a song called Roll'em Pete. The performance stunned the audience. It was urban, modern, and wild. Recorded in the studio just a week later, Rollin' Pete would become one of the most important precursors of rock and roll, featuring boogie-woogie piano, a driving beat, and a singer trading verses like choruses with a sax section. The success of From Spirituals to Swing led to a residency at Cafe Society, the integrated New York nightclub where Turner and Johnson shared bills with Billie Holiday and a who's who of swing-era players. They began cutting records: Cherry Red, Wee Baby Blues. This showcased both Joe's deep blues storytelling and his booming shout. Joe Turner wasn't reading music. He didn't need to. He carried hundreds of floating blues verses in his head, reshuffling them to fit whatever groove the band was playing. In jam sessions, he could trade choruses with horn players for hours without repeating himself. As the 1940s began, Joe Turner followed the music west, landing in Los Angeles. In 1941, he appeared at Duke Ellington's revue, Jump for Joy, playing a singing policeman in a comedy sketch, one of his first brushes with show business beyond the bandstand. By the end of the 1940s, Joe Turner stood as one of the definitive blues shouters, a man whose voice had carried Kansas City's barroom energy all the way to the West Coast. In 1951, Joe Turner took the stage at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, fronting the Count Basie Orchestra as a substitute for fellow blues shouter Jimmy Rushing. In the audience sat two brothers who were planning to turn their young label, Atlantic Records, into a powerhouse. Atlantic understood that Joe's voice was an instrument in itself. They surrounded him with tight bands, horn riffs, and those classic New Orleans and Kansas City grooves. In early 1954, Atlantic staff writer Jesse Stone, using his pen name Charles Calhoun, brought Joe Turner a new tune. The song was called Shake, Rattle and Roll.
I let shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. Well, hurry up, baby, before I get too old. Rattle and roll.
Turner recorded it in New York on February 15, 1954. Backed by a crack studio band, he boomed out opening lines that were equal parts command and come on. Within weeks, the record was climbing the charts. Black radio embraced it. In some cities, the lyrics were simply too raw for conservative stations, but that didn't stop kids from feeding coins into jukeboxes to hear Joe Turner shout about sunlight shining through those dresses. Soon, white artists lined up to cover it. Bill Haley and his Comets cut a cleaned-up version for Decca that scored higher on the pop charts, while Elvis Presley later matched up Haley's arrangement with Turner's original lyrics. But for many listeners, Joe's record remained the one that sounded dangerous. Shake, Rattle, and Roll didn't just make Big Joe Turner a teenage favorite. It helped drag the blues shouting of Kansas City into the heart of American popular culture. Over the next few years, Joe Turner unleashed a string of party anthems: Flip, Flop, and Fly, Honey Hush, The Chicken and the Hawk, Morning, Noon, and Night, Carina Carina. Many became million sellers and R&B chart staples. Hollywood took notice. Joe sang Shake, Rattle, and Roll in the 1955 feature Rhythm and Blues Review, then popped up in the film Shake, Rattle, and Rock a year later. On the big screen, his massive frame and easy smile matched the sound audiences already knew from the records. In 1957, Turner toured Australia as part of Lee Gordon's Big Show, sharing the stage with Bill Haley and the Comets, Laverne Baker, and other American rock and rollers. On those long flights and longer bus rides, the man who'd once inspired Haley's sound now watched as this younger, more photogenic generation took center stage. Joe never stopped being a blues man. He kept doing what he'd always done, shouting and swinging with the band. By the end of the 1950s, radio had moved on. Rock and roll was now a youth industry ruled by fresh-faced stars barely half Joe Turner's age. His last major R&B chart entry came in 1958 with Jump for Joy. The hits may have slowed, but the work didn't. Through the 1960s, Turner shifted back towards the jazz and blues circuits, fronting small combos in clubs and touring Europe, where audiences treated him as a living link to the swing era. In 1966, an old admirer lent him a hand. Bill Haley, whose own career had taken a detour to Mexico, invited Turner to record there, lending him the Comets as a backing band for a series of sessions on the Orpheon label. The mentor and the disciple, side by side, brought Kansas City blues and early rock and roll full circle. These weren't chart-topping recordings, but they kept Joe's voice on record and on the road. For him, singing wasn't a fad. It was manual labor, a craft he'd been honing since those long nights at the Sunset Club.
Well, I'm from the country, baby. Get blowed into your bread big town. Well, I'm from the country, baby. Get blowed into your bread big town. Well, I heard about you, baby, and I know what you've been putting down. Yeah.
As the 1970s opened, the world finally began to catch up to Joe Turner's importance. He recorded steadily, often in the company of jazz greats and younger blues bands eager to support him. Albums like Things That I Used to Do, Have No Fear, Joe Turner Is Here, and later, Kansas City, Here I Come, found him revisiting standards and old Kansas City material, his voice rougher around the edges, but still unmistakable. In 1979, he returned home on film in The Last of the Blue Devils, a documentary celebrating the Kansas City jazz tradition. Sharing the spotlight with Count Basie and other hometown legends, Turner stood as both survivor and symbol. In 1983, he was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. That same year, he recorded Blues Train with the Jump Blues revival band Room Full of Blues, proving once again that his shout could ride any horn section. Offstage, those who knew Joe Turner remembered a gentle, generous man, quick with a joke, patient with younger musicians, and proud of his Kansas City roots. But he had his demons, too. Years on the road, bad business deals, and the physical wear of shouting the blues for decades took its toll. By the early 1980s, he was living in the Los Angeles area, dealing with arthritis, diabetes, and the after effects of a stroke, even as he continued to perform when he could. Critic Robert Palmer once wrote that Turner's voice was rich and grainy as a section of saxophones, dominating any room with its sheer sound. Even as age bent his shoulders, that sound never completely left him. In his final years, Big Joe Turner lived in Inglewood, California, not far from the clubs and studios where he'd worked since the 1940s. He was no longer a chart presence, but musicians and serious fans knew exactly who he was. By 1985, his health problems were mounting. And on November 24th, at the age of 74, Big Joe Turner died of heart failure in Inglewood. At his funeral, fellow singers Etta James and Barbara Morrison paid tribute the way he would have wanted, by singing. Joe Turner was laid to rest at Roosevelt Memorial Park. The newspapers noted the passing of a blues shouter from another age, but for musicians he was something more, a pillar knocked from the foundation. 2 years later, in 1987, Big Joe Turner was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rock and roll would never have happened without him. When you listen to early rock and R&B, Little Richard, early Ray Charles, even Elvis, you can hear Joe Turner's fingerprints. The big beat, the shouts, the mixture of sacred and profane language. They all grew out of that Kansas City style he embodied. In the end, Big Joe Turner's story is simple and profound. He was a Kansas City kid who lost his father early and grew up in the back rooms of a wide-open town. He turned a job behind the bar into a microphone, a street corner shout into an art form. From the Sunset Club to Carnegie Hall, from Atlantic Records to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Joe Turner carried the blues forward, loud, proud, and unafraid. He didn't just shake, rattle, and roll the jukebox. He shook the foundations of American music.
Chorus.